What's going on, everybody? Troy Moriello here of We Want More Sports Productions, bringing you episode number 1 of the We Want More Sports Podcast. It's a pleasure to be here at Iona College, at the Murphy Center at Iona College, bringing you our inaugural edition of this podcast. You can catch me on Twitter at Troy Moriello, TroyMauriello. I'll be posting this. I'll be posting links to our website, which is in the process of being built. We've got an article up right now already. 5 NFL coaches on the hot seat for the 2019 season. So we'll be posting articles every week, as well as a couple podcasts every week as well, just with my thoughts on the sports world. Well, we're getting into that. You know, it's a very busy week in sports. Obviously, we have the NBA Finals tonight on Wednesday night. Game 3 between the Raptors and the Warriors. It's a crucial Game 3 for those two teams as the series shifts to Golden State. Kevin Durant's not playing, but we'll see if he ends up playing in the next couple of weeks. We also have a Game 5 in the NHL coming up between the Boston Bruins and the St. Louis Blues. Those two teams are tied 2 games apiece. Crucial games, Game 5 coming up. Really, the team that wins Game 5 ends up winning the series most of the time. So we'll see where that goes. We've got baseball in full swing as well. We've got NFL mandatory mini camps coming up. So a whole lot of stuff coming up in the sports calendar. But I actually want to start today's podcast and have today's podcast cover something that I thought went a little bit under the radar last week. That wasn't really talked about as much in the midst of this NBA draft decision deadline. So if you're not familiar, the NBA draft, if you were an underclassman that declared for the NBA draft after the college basketball season, you had, I believe, until last Wednesday at 6 p.m. to either keep your name in the draft or pull your name out of the draft. Now, I think about 87 players who were underclassmen ended up jumping out of the draft and staying in college for another year, but one went kind of under the radar, and that was RJ Hampton. Now, this was in the midst of all this happening. RJ Hampton was a 5-star recruit, a top 5 recruit, some said, in the class of 2019. So he would have played college basketball next year. Instead of going to play college for a year, his top choice was rumored to be Kansas, and he actually confirmed his top choice was Kansas. Instead of going to play college basketball at Kansas and being another one-and-done player, RJ Hampton instead announced last Tuesday, I believe it was, that he would be going and playing overseas in Australia, in the Australian Basketball League for a year, actually in New Zealand, for the New Zealand Breakers. So that's kind of a weird thing. It has happened before, obviously. And actually it has happened before with top picks as well. So we've seen this with guys like Brendan Jennings and Emmanuel Mudiay in the last 10 years or so. But RJ Hampton decides to leave, or to not even go to college, get paid right away, make some money, presumably for a year, you would think, and then after a year now will enter his name in the 2020 NBA draft. You can't fault him for that. I'm all for people wanting to make money as quickly as possible. I'm never gonna question a kid, going to the NBA draft or going professional, and trying to make money instead of playing as an amateur in college, but we'll see how this works out for him. My first comment that I want to make on that, however, though, is I saw some people saying that this is going to kind of change the game. Change the college basketball recruiting game, change the NBA draft game. We all know the one-and-done rule, which I'll have my thoughts on that in a second. People said that this is going to kind of affect the one-and-done rule now. It's really just going to affect the whole basketball, recruiting as a whole from really ages, 18 to 19 in that age. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that this is going to have some sort of culture shock. As I said, we've seen it in the past. We saw guys like Brendan Jennings do it in 2009. Instead of going to USC, Brendan Jennings goes overseas and plays in China, I believe. We saw someone like Emmanuel Mudiay in 2014. Instead of playing for SMU, he was committed to SMU with Larry Brown. He instead decides, I'm going to go overseas and play in China, was the 7th pick in the NBA draft to the Denver Nuggets. Those are two guys that have done this, and Jennings had a decent run for a little bit with the Milwaukee Bucks, but then wasn't really anything big. And Mudiay, I think we can all agree, has been a bit of a disappointment so far in the NBA, so much so that he ended up on my New York Knicks, which if you end up on the Knicks at this point, you probably aren't doing so great in your career. So neither one of those players really hit it out of the park after going overseas and foregoing their college eligibility. So Hampton, just by doing this, I don't think that really creates such a culture shock for college basketball recruiting. Now, ask me in 2 years from now if RJ Hampton goes out and he, plays great in this Australian league, wins the MVP or whatever, is a top 10 pick in the NBA draft, just like Jennings and Moutier, and then ends up, winning Rookie of the Year in 2021, 2 years from now, really, in the 2021 Rookie of the Year. If that ends up happening, then sure, then maybe this will start to create a little bit of a shockwave. But it's way too early to say, this is going to be the big change that now a lot of guys are going to start going overseas and doing this. Well, no, because that's always been an option. That's been an option since the one and done rule was put in place over a decade ago. So that's not going to be something that changes the whole world of college basketball recruiting, I don't think. But I mentioned before my second point that I wanted to make today, and that was about the one and done rule. This one and done rule, I'm so sick and tired of it. I'm happy that there is at least some conversations now of putting an end to the one and done rule. My thoughts on this are that the NBA, it doesn't do a whole lot for the NBA. I guess if you're a proponent of the one and done rule, you can say, well, kids who are 18 years old aren't even fully developed yet as basketball players. They shouldn't be playing with guys in their, late 20s, fully developed guys. But you look at a kid like Zion Williamson. Do you really think at this time last year Zion Williamson couldn't be playing in the NBA? Do you really think at this time 2 years ago someone like DeAndre Ayton couldn't be playing in the NBA? There are success stories. LeBron James, he's obviously a crazy example, but LeBron James was ready to go into the NBA right away. You rarely see a kid, and there were a few, but you rarely see it. There were more so guys that went into the NBA straight from college and had great careers. LeBron James, Kevin Garnett, Kobe Bryant. These were kids that came into the NBA at 18 years old and dominated, really. There were a few, obviously, that didn't have great careers. Look at someone like Sebastian Telfair. But overall, I think that the one-and-done rule doesn't do a whole lot for the NBA. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And to me, the one-and-done rule is killing college basketball. You look at the top programs in college basketball now, they're not programs anymore. I was having this conversation actually a couple days ago off air. Look at Duke. Duke used to be a 4-year, university. I don't want to say academics first, but, a university that had kids come for 4 years, play from their freshman to their senior year, and then, or at least to their junior year, and then go to the draft. Now Duke is essentially just, a prospect camp for a couple months. And same thing with, Kentucky, even North Carolina had some seniors, but their best player, Kobe White, was a one-and-done kid. So I don't think that the one-and-done rule is helping college basketball in any way. And it also takes away the amateur side of college basketball. The NCAA loves to claim that their athletes are still amateurs and that they shouldn't be getting paid because they're still amateurs. Yet you look at this one-and-done rule. How are they amateurs in any way? Zion Williamson had a camera follow him around every game that Duke played in the NCAA tournament. There was a camera following Zion Williamson, tracking every movement that he made on the court. Yet he was still regarded as an amateur. He didn't see $1 for that. How are these kids still amateurs? And you look at college basketball nowadays, and these kids are just they're not looked at as amateurs. They're not looked at as amateurs, and these kids are not looked at as amateurs anymore. And to be honest with you, it just doesn't help college basketball. It really does not help college basketball to have these kids playing for a year. They're not, the amateur aspect of college basketball is that you come in. I'm sorry. The amateurism in college basketball is that you're supposed to be getting an education, right? Well, these kids are not getting an education because they're coming for, you look at a one-and-done kid, they're coming onto campus probably in, July, maybe. They're coming in July. They're going to summer classes, they're going to fall classes. The season starts at the end of the fall semester, you would say, around November. And then they play out, and then for, once the spring semester comes along, they're not really even going to class much more because they're, traveling for the NCAA tournament or their conference tournament. And then once March comes along, they declare for the draft, and that's that. So they're in school for what, 6 months? That's not an amateur player. That's a professional player at that point. They're not going to, any aspect of them going to that college for education, which is what the NCAA likes to call its student athletes. That's not a student athlete. That's just an athlete going to school for a year to like I said, go to like a prospect camp for a year and then basically move out of school. So I don't think that the NCAA needs the one and done rule to go away because it's killing whatever facade that they have up that there are still amateur athletes playing for them and that there's still student athletes playing for them. I think that my proposal would be to eliminate the one and done rule. The NBA and the NCAA come together, even though it's really an NBA rule. The NCAA and the NBA come together to eliminate the one and done rule and make a rule like this. If you're 18 years old and you're a high school senior and you think that you're good enough to go to the NBA draft and you've gotten enough feedback that you think that you can go to the NBA draft, you're free to declare as a high school senior. You're free to go straight into the NBA draft. Now, if you are a high school senior and you declare for the draft and you go undrafted, or you are, I'm going to say, a second-round pick, you can pull your name out of the draft and you can go to college. I think that that's fair. That helps out the player. If things don't go in the player's favor, then they can drop out of college, then they can drop out of the draft and go to college for a year maybe or two, and then go and then get drafted later. But if you're a first-round pick, you're going to the NBA. You know, if you thought that you were going to be a lottery pick and you end up being the 25th pick to the Atlanta Hawks and you don't want to go to Atlanta, or you go to the Memphis Grizzlies and you don't want to go to Memphis, you got to go to Memphis because you declared for the draft and you're in the draft and you're a first-round pick and you can't make a team lose a first-round pick. That's my thoughts on the NBA side. On the college side, I think that if you're a high school senior, you're 18 years old, you go to college, you want to go to college, there's no more one and done. You go to college, you have to stay for 2 years. So you have to stay for your freshman year and you have to stay for your sophomore year. And then you can declare for the draft. So you either go straight out of high school or stay in college for 2 years. Because then that at least allows the NCAA to keep up this, like I said, this facade of a student athlete. You know, if you're in college for, you go basically from the July after you graduate high school all the way until, the March of your sophomore year, at least you're going to college, you're getting a real college experience. There is no more college experience in college basketball. That's my biggest issue with it, is that there's no more college experience. The idea of a student athlete is completely out the window in college basketball, and that's really what the NCAA operates itself on. That's why they don't pay the players, which is a whole